Hi everybody, it's Here with the Birds, back with another Shadowlands video. And in this video I'd like to cover two topics that I get asked a lot about. The first is your keybinds as a Holy Paladin, and more generally perhaps as a player. And the second is user interface. These are two really important pieces of any, especially PvE gameplay, but also to some degree PvP as well. The reason for that is on both sides, your user interface, or the add-ons and tools you're going to use to develop your information, and your keybinds can be either a massive detriment to your gameplay or a huge boon. So I want to talk about both of them today and give you some tips to think about your own. Again, these things are very personal, so take from this video what you'd like, and if you don't like something I say, just leave it alone and do it your own way. But hopefully this will help you to be a little more efficient in both of these areas, and that'll help to improve your raid team's performance overall. Let's begin with keybinds. You can see here I've blown up the four major bars that I use for keybinds in this game, and most of them are completely filled up with an actual keybind. You can see in terms of my actual gameplay, I have my keybinds off to the left of my screen. You've probably seen it in other videos, and very small. And so I don't rely on my keybinds, and I'm using Bartender here as an add-on to hold on to them. I don't rely on looking down at my keybinds during my fights. Whenever I'm in the middle of combat, this will disappear, and instead I will be left with a very clean UI that I'll show you in a minute. And I want to begin there because I think it's very important for any player, DPS, tank, or healer, to build the muscle memory for their abilities. And here we have 4 rows of 12, so 48 different keybinds that are available to me. I think I have perhaps 46 of them bound. Some of them aren't quite as important as others, obviously. And I'm going to walk you through what kinds of choices I'm making to set this up. So I'm going to begin here in the top left-hand corner. The 4 most important buttons that I'm going to press, these are the ones that I'm giving prime real estate for my fingers. And I've chosen to use a setup where I use Q, E, R, and F as my main buttons. Alongside that, I use 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this combination, Q, E, R, F, and 1, 2, 3, 4, those 8 buttons are the primary buttons I'm looking to press when I'm playing the game. I use WASD with my left hand, and so all of these buttons are in close proximity to my fingers over top of my movement keys. So if I'm strafing to the left or to the right, I can easily click these buttons. I can holy shock myself, I can cast an ability, so on and so forth. QERF is a little bit cramped for some of your finger sizes, and so I would suggest building up a set of keybinds that fit the size of your hand. But my hand is, even though it's slightly large, I've just gotten used to having that cramped style. I like to be able to quickly move to my keys, and I don't want to have to jump too far around. So, outside of those 8, QERF and 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm just going to modify each of those in a couple of different ways. Shift, Alt, and Control. Some of those are easier to press than others, so your Shift key with your pinky finger on your left hand is going to be the most accessible modifier. So I have keys that are somewhat important connected to that. The next key modifier, Alt, is a little bit easier than Control, so I have keys that I think are slightly less important than Shift, but slightly more important than Control on my Alt key. And then Control is the last key. So let me just run through a setup here for the caster version of your melee paladin. This can also go for anyone who's trying to do a ranged build. I want to have Holy Light as my premier button to press. Alongside that, Holy Shock and Word of Glory. So those 3 take up the most important pieces of real estate on my keybinds, Q, E, and R. And then I have here Beacon of Virtue because I've been doing a lot of testing with it, and it's moved up in importance over the course of my testing and the videos that I've been doing, and I'm going to be thinking about using this more and more going into Castle Nathria. I know it sounds like a bit of a meme, but don't worry, I'll publish some video footage of me doing it so that you can see how it can be done effectively. And it has actually risen really high up in priority for me, partly because of the way it interacts with Holy Light. So I want to be able to spam my beacon as I'm casting a Holy Light in order for it to proc the Holy Light into beacon that's being cast. And the result of that required me to find a bind that didn't make me contort my hand in order to be spamming that button just to make sure it landed. That's one of the main concerns that you want to have. The regular buttons that you're going to press, are they forcing your hand to do multiple movements? Is the strain between going from your most important buttons and your second most important buttons really far, and therefore your rotation will be a cramped one over the course of an entire fight? Or is it something that's very simple to move from? I think of it a lot like playing a musical instrument, and say a guitar. If you're trying to go from a G chord to a B minor, your hand has to move in a certain motion. If you're trying to go from an E chord to an A, it's a lot less movement overall. So the same kind of logic applies here. We're actually thinking very practically about the use of our hand over the course of a fight. So you can see the prime real estate is here, QERF, and then I have major cooldowns at 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's going to be my wings, my blessing of sacrifice, lay on hands, and protection. And I keep them here in part because in the middle of battle I want something that's just a little bit removed from my main buttons, but I can press them almost immediately whenever I need it. And so it's a really nice access point. A lot of people begin the game using 1, 2, 3, 4 in the way that I use QERF, and if that's you, completely fine. If you want your rotational abilities to be 1, 2, 3, 4, just know that you'll have to look in other directions and for other keys. One thing I would suggest is don't go past 5 on your number buttons. So I have 5 as my mount, so that's the cutoff point, meaning I don't press this button very much. I don't press it in combat, so I'm not going to look past 5 for any buttons. And also I would be hesitant to move past T and past G on your keyboard to the right, and even Z and X, though I have them bound for specific reasons, are also kind of complicated. So Z, X, C, V, these are all binds that force your hand to cramp up a little bit. So just be aware, you want to build out probably about 12 good binds that you can count on pressing, if it's QERF or it's 1, 2, 3, 4, with your shift modifier, something like that, enough to get the central pieces that you'd like. Now, some of you are interested in building in mouse over pieces, or you have a nice Razer mouse or something with a lot of buttons on it. And if this is you, that's great. I would suggest building your utility into those pieces. So I'm a raid leader, and I have a couple of different CC targets and kill targets and that sort of thing, and I bind those onto a few of my buttons on my mouse. And the unique part about that is it allows you to sort of set aside to your right hand on your thumb a set of instructions that you know you can grab, but you're not putting too much over there. So your left hand is doing most of the work, your right hand can be focused on moving the camera and that sort of thing. It doesn't have to do double work. It's sort of like playing the drums. If you're playing the drums, you have one hand that's doing most of the work over here, and the other one has secondary duties. Though some of you prefer to have most of your rotational features on your mouse keys, and that's fine too. Just make sure your muscle memory is pretty clear. That brings me to my second major point when we're thinking about keybinds. If you're going to be switching up your spec and using different talents, so in this case I've been testing out Light's Hammer, but Bestow Faith and Holy Prism have also been a piece of doing some of this Holy Light build. And these keybinds are going to require me to shuffle up a bit what I prioritize. So too, if I went with a Glimmer of Light build with Crusader's Might, suddenly the value of Crusader Strike goes way up, and I probably need to move it to a more important position. So instead of pressing Alt-R to access Crusader Strike, I likely want to stick it back in the Q spot in one of those most important ranges. So you need to be aware, if you're planning to try a bunch of different things, if you can set up a style that allows you to have fairly even access across all of your major keys to all of these options, you'll be in a better place because your muscle memory doesn't have to keep relearning or transitioning from one build to another. In any case, you may have to flip back and forth a little bit because for Holy Paladin, the priority of Crusader Strike dramatically increases when you want to play the Glimmer build. If you're not pressing Crusader Strike, you are not cooling down Holy Shock. If you're not cooling down Holy Shock, you're not going to be effective in the Glimmer build. So really I would suggest prioritizing Crusader Strike, get it up here into these major binds that you have for yourself. Okay? Holy Shock, Word of Glory, and Light of Dawn are always going to have prime position for Holy Paladins, and you just need to decide how to build around that. Likewise, most of you, if you're taking Glimmer, are not even going to have an important bind for Beacon of Virtue. This can be a control bind over here, something really unimportant that you press one time in a raid. But I have all of my defensives in a similar position, and if you play a lot of alts, guys, I would suggest trying to match up abilities with your alts as well. So in my Shift R key, that's kind of an AoE key, so is Shift F. All of my classes, whether healers, damage, tanks, all have AoE spells in the Shift R, Shift F range. 1, 2, 3, 4 are major CDs, and my Shift 1, 2, and 3 are usually defensive CDs across all of my tunes. So if you can build your muscle memory across many alts, that's also something really useful. Don't get too scared by how many binds I'm laying out for you here. You don't need all of these to be effective. I just find that if I don't take the time to put these into a bind, my muscle memory doesn't build, and I don't have the ability to react in time when it's necessary. Okay, that covers the basics of how I think about building a keybind setup. Second thing I want to talk about is how to build a user interface that is very productive for you as a healer. I'm thinking very specifically here about raiding and not even about Mythic Plus necessarily. You'll see here I'm running Grid 2, and I'll try to put the information out for you guys so you can see all of the UI elements I have going here. And Grid 2 is an excellent add-on that just reshapes your party frames and raid frames. And what I like about it is the accessibility of a lot of tweaking I can do. And the baseline version here is a UI add-on that Mend produced, M-E-N-D. And so one of the useful things about it has been across a lot of different characters. I used to play Disc Priest especially. You can track by coloring the box where your Glimmer is, or in the case of a Disc Priest, which targets have Atonement on it, and it just changes the color slightly from the gray background to blue. So across an entire raid you can see who has Glimmer or who has Atonement, and that was a really big benefit for me as a healing class. In any case, that will fill up about this bottom quarter of my screen. And the purpose of developing a useful UI, especially with the weak auras, in this case Tell Me When, that I'm setting up, and your party grids, is to allow you to interact with whatever mechanics are going on in a boss fight while getting accurate information. And the main thing I want to stress for you guys, whether you're a DPS, tank, or a healer, is you want to centralize information. It takes a great deal of mental energy to move your eye to the corner of this space and back again to the action. Your character is centered here. You want as much of the relevant information that you're going to need to come into the center of this region. So just to the right of me, I have major cooldowns that I can track, whether I have Bubble, whether my Avenging Wrath is going on, if I have Rule of Law on, Holy Avenger, those sorts of things. To my that's just to my immediate right. To my left, I'm going to have all of the boss mechanics show up. So if you're using Bigwigs or DBM, a lot of the timers will show up just to the right here, so I can track what's going on there. This is prime real estate right around your character. Just above my entire grid of party frames or raid frames, I have a set of major cooldowns. The bottom set here, and I'm using Tell Me When, as I mentioned before, is all of the defensive and utility pieces. So I can track in a moment, just glancing down, is my aura ready, sack, lay on hands, and so forth. And on the top row, I have major abilities. So just to the left, I have major rotational abilities, Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, Judgment, that sort of thing. Just to the right, I have major CD buttons that are kind of rotational, and when they're going to come off CD. And what I tend to try and do is give myself an activation bar for some of these, especially the ones just on the right here, so that and the ones on the bottom row as well. So when they come back off CD, it just flares up for 0.8 seconds. I'll show you what this notification looks like within Tell Me When. You can produce the same kind of thing in a weak aura, but I'm just going to have it trigger an activation border whenever the opacity changes. So I have them usually set to a slightly lower opacity. You can see Holy Shock here is about 43%. When it goes on cooldown, it goes transparent. And then when it comes off cooldown, it'll just flash a little activation border for me so I can see. This, I think, is one of the more important elements to include once you've centralized all of your information, because as a healer, your focus is in a couple of different places at the same time. You are looking at the boss and any ground mechanics. You're checking timers to see when you need to prepare to heal. You're dealing with anybody who's injured. You're maybe doing damage to the boss, or you're switching targets. So it needs to be something that gives you a little bit of a burst of attention, especially important for the pieces that you'll only use situationally. So you know when your Lay on Hands comes back, or you know when Divine Aura, your Aura Mastery, is ready to go. I have in this bottom left-hand corner rotational buffs. So these are things that I can count on. I do it for Divine Purpose, and I think this is probably something you should do as a Paladin in general. Divine Purpose will proc above your character. This is a talent, and that happens whenever you spend a holy power and you get a free one. The reason I want to track it with a weak aura or a Tell Me When is because this ability kind of sometimes blends into the environment, and it's hard to tell when it's up if you're in the middle of battle. So I like to have it right here to let me know that I definitely have that proc ready to go. Similarly, Beacon, I want to know the timing, especially of Beacon of Virtue, so I know how much time is ready to go. And as an additional bonus, what I like to do when I'm using Grid 2 is to track who has my beacon by blowing it up in the options here. So I have my beacon show up on top of the person in the party who has it. So this is useful, especially now that we build Holy Power through Holy Light and Flash of Light being cast on the target with beacon. It's nice to kind of make that a little bit larger so that you can track exactly who has the beacon, especially important if you're going to be using Beacon of Virtue. So you'll see the timer go. When you press Beacon of Virtue, you'll have 8 seconds ticking down here, and that'll be on whichever party members receive that buff, just so you know how much time you have to cast your abilities within that range. Finally, I don't like the default tracker for Holy Power, the sort of 5 little pips that you get below your character or on your character screen. I like to track it as a central number, so I have a resource display that displays Holy Power, and then I just do a center number text layout with value and rounding for Tell Me When. You can do a similar thing with weak auras as well. I find that it's just useful to just see that number and not have to interpret the little bars that come off. How many do I have? Blah, 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 blah. You don't have to do it this way. That's always useful. Always good to track your mana. I do the same thing as this weak aura here. Instead, we're just going to be tracking mana. Now, I can't stress enough to you guys, if you would like to improve as a healer especially, you need to centralize your information. You need to have a very clean setup for your keybinds where you know exactly where these things are. If your hand is really cramped with a QERF style, then find another way to do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe you're in TG area for your main spells. Whatever it takes, rebuild it, and then make it invisible when you're in combat. So it forces you to have to learn these keybinds by heart. And I would practice on dummies, guys. Go down to a dummy in one of the areas, just slap it around for a bit, use all of your abilities, use your bop, use your Lay on Hands, get into the habit of pressing these buttons. These are the ways to really improve your gameplay so that you know in any given moment you'll be ready to go. Those are the basic 2 things I wanted to cover for the UI and for keybinds. If you guys have questions about your setup, please let me know. I know that many of you are starting to pick up Holy Paladin, or you're trying to figure out how do I make the melee Paladin build work. It seems like a lot of GCDs to press. It is, and one of the best ways you can do it is by cleaning up your UI and cleaning up your keybinds so that you're confident that the buttons you're pressing most often are in the best position for your hand. Okay, thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you guys next time.